Hi guys, this is Mr. Katsev. We're going to be doing video 4.10 problems of local government and participation. Your objectives are to learn more about these issues, these problems that are coming up in local governments. That includes duplication of services, funding of schools, charter versus public schools, and then just in general problems with local participation. As always, take good notes, and here we go. So one of the biggest problems for local governments, and especially for St. Louis City and St. Louis County, is this idea of duplication of services. Story goes way back. It goes back actually to 1876. It was called the Great Divorce. It was when city residents decided to vote out and leave and create their own city and outcast the St. Louis County. They thought that the county was a bunch of hicks, a bunch of rural area. It wasn't going to grow very fast. So in 1876, they decided that the city of St. Louis was going to be its own entity, and then those other area, the county, it was going to be also its own entity. And so this allowed for the county to develop multiple municipalities. What I mean by that is Chesterfield, Wildwood, Town and Country, Creve Coeur. All of those areas are their own cities, and therefore they have their own police departments, they have their own fire departments, i.e. duplication of services. Now there's some benefits to this. Of course, having a Wildwood policeman, having a Chesterfield policeman, having a Creve Coeur policeman, they know their area well. They know their precinct really inside and out. They know the good spots to go to, how to make sure crime is low. However, one negative cost for sure can be the cost. It's expensive to have all these different police that have their own jurisdiction. Some long-term effects that 1876 nobody ever saw is that the county grew extremely fast. The white flight of the 50s took more people out to the suburbs with the highway system, and the city of St. Louis has been declining in population since 1950. So this long-term effect of how do we bring these two entities together? Well, it's been put to the voters 5 times, and each time this vote has failed. Another big thing to think about when it comes to local participation and how you're going to participate after these 4 years of being in high school is funding of schools. Being involved in your local board for a high school, for the school district that you live in, is so important, and that all boils down to property taxes and property value. So should the funding of schools be so closely tied to property taxes and value? I mean, that's how much, and that's a big part of the way that local governments are going to get their money is through property value, and that then trickles right into the schools. And also, the other big important thing to think about is that last question. Are there more efficient ways to allocate money toward education and provide support for unaccredited schools? The school that you see on the right, that's Normandy High School. Normandy High School used to be unaccredited. What that means is if a school is unaccredited, it means that when you graduate that high school, the state of Missouri does not feel like you received a sufficient level of education, and it will not have that schooling go toward anything. So you need to be accredited and be looked at by the Department of Secondary Education as a acceptable school. And so earning back accreditation for schools can sometimes be extremely difficult. It's a slippery slope. If you don't have enough money to put in to hire good teachers, have good education, raise your test scores, you're never going to get that accreditation. If you never get that accreditation, kids that would go to Normandy High School, they're going to decide to go elsewhere. That's the idea of the voucher program, where students can go to different places if their school district is not up to the standards. Another thing related to school districts is charter versus private schools. A big difference between the two is charter schools don't necessarily have to have a religious idea, but they're outside of a traditional public school setting where the education is more fine-tuned, it's more specific for a certain cause, for a certain mission statement, where private schools can, for the most part, be generally tied to religion. Here in St. Louis, we predominantly have Catholic private schools. The big thing that you are are dealing with here is how much role should the government have in these private schools? How much can the government fund a private school or a charter school for that matter in order for there not to be this gray area between the separation of church and state? And so the Supreme Court and doing the litmus test, that 3-part test, some of those issues have been coming up and they will continue to come up when it comes to private schooling. The final problem to think about with local government and participation in local government is how do we increase voter turnout? Normally we have okay voter turnout when it comes to every 4 years with the voting of our president. That election can normally do pretty well, especially with issues when it comes to local government. Everybody seems to get really concerned about those issues as it comes to the president, but then nobody's going to go to the polls that next April when those same issues are being an election year. So how do we make sure that people are consistently staying up to date on issues and consistently turning out to vote? And then also, how do we make it as efficient as possible to vote? The framers of our Constitution made it a point that there is not going to be a national election, that actually it was more efficient to have the local boards, to have the local cities be in charge of the way that you vote. Is that the best way to do it? Are there other ways to think about how we vote and the best ways to organize our voting? That is for you all to decide. So appreciate you listening, and I hope you have a great rest of the semester.